What is up, you guys? I'm here coming at a new tutorial. I know it's been a couple of weeks since my last one. However, hoping to actually start uploading a lot more actively than I am currently. Hoping for at least an upload a week, if not more. But anyways, let's get right into this. So today we're going to be going over how I create this album art you see here. Just kind of these really nice, clean looking covers. Some of these are requested, other these are just for fun. This one's for myself. So let's just get into this. So we're going to be working in Photoshop CC, where this will work in pretty much any Photoshop version. I believe CS5 and above. Cannot say anything for CS5 and below CS5 because I have not worked with any of those softwares, and I have not worked with any other softwares other than Photoshop in a long time. So not sure if this is going to work in other software. I'm sure you're going to be able to figure out a way if you don't use Photoshop, but just try to follow along. So first off, we're going to be working in a new document. This is going to be a 10-inch by 10-inch document. The reason I use those numbers is number one, most album covers are about 4.5 or 5 inches by 5 inches. Depends on the cover. That's when they're printed and cut. And I always like working in a larger document just so that it's going to, number one, have more more of an area for the canvas, at least when I'm working. And number two, it just looks a lot better, and it's a lot easier to scale down than it is to scale up. So let's just get into this. So I'm going to be using this image here that I got off Twitter of a rapper called Michael Christmas. And you can see that it's already pretty edited, pretty processed and all that. But we are going to go over trying to remove that editing and that processing, just so we start with kind of a raw image that we can use. Now, we have a couple options here right away that we're presented with. We can see that our image is a little bit too small for our canvas. So we can either, number one, scale that up, or just keep it at the size it is now. I personally like it at the size it is now. I like this kind of white border outside. I think that gives a really nice effect. And we can definitely do something with that as far as changing the color or adding like textures or something like that. So let's just get into editing our image. So first thing I'm going to do is just hit Control J on my keyboard to make a duplicate, and let me just hide that bottom layer. Now if we go to our filter, you'll see this filter called Camera Raw Filter. You can also get there by hitting Control Shift and A. I normally just go through the filters menu and Alright, that made no sense. Alright, so what we want to do is, number one, change our white balance to custom. We can play around with the temperature a little bit, or the tint. It's not super important right now. Let's turn our exposure down a little bit and our contrast up. That should be good for now. You'll see here that I'm using 0.35 by 35, but this is going to depend on the image that you're using. So if you're not familiar with any of these terms, exposure is basically how much light gets into the image. So if you haven't used a camera, or if you have used a camera, for the most part people are using like point and shoots or DSLRs on like the automatic mode. So the exposure is going to allow more light into the image. So by turning the exposure down, we kind of get rid of a little bit of that white kind of washed out look. And by turning the contrast up, we kind of achieve the same thing, where there's more contrast between the highlights and the darks, so it's not all washed out. So now we can turn our highlights down a little bit. I'm going to turn the highlights down. I'm going to turn our shadows up, turn our whites up a little bit, and then turn our blacks down. And that's again just going to get rid of that kind of washed out look. Now you'll see this bottom menu here called Clarity. Now if you've ever used the high pass filter or the sharpen filter, this is a lot similar to that. However, it does have a little bit more control, and I feel like it gives a better look. So this is where I kind of, again, this is going to depend on the image. But I play around with different settings to see what it looks best. I'm going to do about, let's do 30. I think that looks nice. And the vibrance and saturation, I don't really play around with too much. You definitely can. But again, it is up to the image and up to what you think looks nice. This tone curve here, it's got a little bit more control over what we were just doing. So you can turn the highlights up or down. I'm gonna turn them up in the curve. Turn our lights down. Turn our darks and shadows to the appropriate settings. Again, this is a lot of trial and error and just seeing what will go with your image. This details page here is where I do a lot of work as far as clearing up this image. You can see it's got a little bit of grain, and it's got some really distorted pixels. So if you ever use the plugin Topaz, you might know already that you can kind of smooth that out and get rid of that look without needing like a super HD image. So we're going to be doing that without any third-party plugins. This is all just stock Photoshop. So first thing we're going to do is turn our luminance up and turn our luminance contrast up. So the more contrast and luminance you have, the smoother the image is going to look. So you'll see here, this kind of looks like a airbrushed, painted photo, which might be nice for some covers. I know some of the Chance the Rapper album art, while it is, I believe, painted, it's got kind of this effect on it. So let's turn our luminance down a little bit and turn our contrast down as well. Just will, kind of stays at a photo, but definitely has that smooth look to it. So for luminance, I'm going to do 15, and for a contrast, I'm going to just round that up to 50. And I think that looks pretty nice for now. I'm just going to hit OK. And you'll see already, if we, hide and unhide this layer, that we have a lot changed. I'm just going to open up our camera raw filter again, just to finish up our changes. Just make a duplicate of this layer again. And camera raw filter. And now if we go over to our next tab is going to be HSL grayscale. I never really played around with this. There's a few images that I definitely have. You can kind of turn certain colors on and off, or desaturate or saturate them, change the luminance. It's really up to you and up to the image. For this, I'm just going to leave it all at 0 as the defaults. Split toning, I very rarely use this. I have used it a couple times in a few different covers in my portfolio, but it's very, very light when I do use it, because I prefer to use a gradient map for stuff like this, because I think it looks a lot nicer, and it has a lot more control with a lot less, with being a lot less destructive. So this lens corrections, again, it's something that I very rarely use. If it's an image that is distorted or anything like that, or I want to change like the vignette, anything like that, I'll play around with it. I'm actually going to turn a vignette on, just -100. It's going to give us these black edges around the sides. I think that looks pretty nice. And then effects is, again, somewhere that I work a lot in. So this dehaze, it kind of sharpens the image, kind of makes it clearer, while also removing some of that white, washed out look. So let's going to do +2 for now, just because we've kind of got rid of most of that already. We just zoomed in way too much. We fit that to the view. And then we can add our grain. So the grain is where, I use the grain in here just because I think you get more control, as opposed to using like a stock of grain or making your own grain through the noise filter. Yeah. And then this, camera calibration, you want to do this first if you're going to change any of these settings. I normally don't change any of them just because there's really no need to in most images. And then there's the presets tab. So if you come up with something that you like, just click down here, give it a name, and hit OK. And then you can just reference that anytime you need to in future work. And then just hit OK. And you'll see we have already this really nice effect from where we started. So let's hide this, unhide it, and you'll see our image is a little bit clearer. We got some grain going on. We've got kind of like a vintage look. Yeah, so let me just hide that layer. And you'll see here I have this document called Stuff for Album Art. Pretty creative name. Just a few different stocks that I use. Some textures, some film burns, some film grains, just some extra resources. So I'm going to grab this. I'll have a link down to this pack in the description. I'm just going to grab this and pull it into our document. So let's throw it right there. And just create a clipping mask just so it's stuck only in this section. Let's turn opacity down a little bit. So you know what I might do? Instead of turning the opacity down, let's turn our saturation down. That way, you get this kind of vintage film look. we're going for on this cover, at least, or that I'm going for. And position it how you need it, and then you can play around with the opacity. It's not going to give that kind of weird colored light from one side. Yeah. So let me just check through here to see if I have the texture I'm looking for. I don't believe I do. But if not, this is where knowing what to search for and knowing what you're trying to create is very important. Just open up Google. And you'll see how to search for paper textures. It's pretty easy to find some decent ones. I'm going to go with this one right here just because of the size of it. And just drag this into our untitled document. Scale it up. And you can see here that it kind of fills in the background. You might not want it to be like the actual background. You might want it as an overlay. So let's give this background a little bit of color. Let's take some colors from our original image. Just hit Control Backspace on the keyboard, and that'll fill our background. Then we can throw the paper back on. Let's change our blend mode to multiply. Maybe turn the opacity down on that a little bit. And now you'll see the image does kind of stand out a little bit. Let's just throw this paper on there a couple times. And maybe you can scale down the paper on this image just so it's a little bit different from our background. Hit OK or Enter. And again, that kind of gives us a vintage look to the image. Let's see, I think this background is either too bright or just not the right color. Let's try changing the color a little bit. You know what, I kind of liked it as a white. And let me just get our paper back. Accidentally got rid of it. Alright, I'm really liking this. So you might be seeing the image still kind of sticks out a little bit. Again, it does depend on what you want for the effect. But this is where I kind of start working on either blending it or making it look a certain way. So I'm just going to go to this website called PNG Image and to see if I can find something on here that's going to make it look a little bit better, kind of have it fit. So let's open up the paper section. Let's see if there's anything else that we could open up that might have something. And again, this is kind of all based off of what you're working on. If you know the artist and you've like seen any of the cover art and you know kind of like what they're going towards, and a lot of it definitely helps out just so you know what kind of images to look for, what kind of images to use. It's not going to use anything in the paper. Pencil, maybe not. Pen, probably the same thing. This money, kind of in the same boat with, just not much that we're able to use. Maybe we'll do some coins and money. See if we can just find like really nice loose coins. Yeah, like 5 cents, wherever that is. Alright, just right click on that, save image. See if there's like $3. $5. See, I want like a pile of this, preferably US though. Guess we can use this. Alright, so we've got the images that we're going to be using. Let's just bring these into Photoshop. Now, the good part about this is you really don't need to edit these images. You can if you'd like. But the thing that I do with this is kind of have the album art look like it's separate from these images. So have like overlapping with these images. So you'll see, I've got some pennies up here. Let me just make a shadow for these guys. Quickest way to do that, at least how I do it, is just make a duplicate, grab our bottom layer, hit Ctrl U on our keyboard to bring up our hue and saturation tab, turn our lightness down to 0, go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and turn the radius up, and you'll see creates a drop shadow for us without needing to actually use a drop shadow filter. Can move this up, down, wherever we need to make it look a little bit more realistic. Turn the opacity down. Alright, so there's our pennies. Might play around with the lighting on these a little bit in a second. This money, I'm going to do like a corner of it, so it's not showing the $100 bill. And again, I'm going to create a drop shadow. We're going to take Control F on our keyboard to kind of create the same blur, and let's position it so the lighting, is uniform throughout the whole thing. We've got $16 there. Let's scale that down a little bit, just to feel like it's really big. And the cigarette, let's see if it's going to fit. Again, you don't want it to be too busy. Definitely incorporate some details, some other stuff that relates to the artist. Yeah, I don't know about that angle, but we'll see. I think it might just be the perspective of the image. And just grab our Gaussian blur again. Yeah, I'm not sure this image is gonna work. Well, we can delete it, it's all good, shouldn't be smoking anyway, so. Now we can grab our text tool. Now this is where, you kind of want to start working inside of everything again. Let me actually release these clipping masks here, and what we're going to do is select this layer, just Control click on it, and Alt click on our mask, and again, Control click, Alt click on our mask, and I actually did that wrong, don't want to Alt click. Want to click on it, and that's going to create a mask. It's going to be similar to a clipping mask, but it's only going to, you don't have to have it only on this layer, so we can add our text and still get these texture effects on it. So let's just type out, I'm going to do Baggy Eyes, because that's the name of his newest album. Turn our scale up, and I just forgot that I actually reset my computer, so I have pretty much no fonts. But font choice is going to be pretty important in this, and in most album covers. You can actually get away with some of these default fonts. I know Arial's pretty solid, so I'm just going to go with that. And change the color to something that's, again, going to work with your album and your artwork. White's always a safe bet. It's going to contrast pretty much everything unless you're working on white. Black, yeah. I'm just going to go with solid white and just center it or position it how you like. I'm going to scale that down, throw it in the bottom right corner, why not? I think that looks pretty nice. And you can see, since it's white, there's not too much of an effect on it, just because multiply and linear dodge don't really work on white backgrounds, but that's fine. In all honesty, it's not super important that you actually have the effects on the text. I know a lot of people like to be able to make out the text and not have any effects on it. Yeah, so I'm just going to wrap this up here since we're pretty much done with this. Obviously there are a few finishing effects that you can go into, but that's really up to you if you want to try out different things and see what looks best for you. So I hope you enjoyed this video, hope you found it informative. Again, I'll have a link to this album art resource